and I taught some courses, realizing that lifestyle was important, how to help people really change. We can do stents and we can do bypass and we can do a whole host of wonderful things to our hearts, but eventually we have to exercise, we have to get out there, and we have to change our diets, and we have to take better care of ourselves. Do you remember Joseph Califano? Health, Education, Welfare? This inspired me in 1979. This is when I decided to become a naturopathic doctor. He had a book called Healthy People, Disease Prevention. We've cured mostly infectious diseases. Now we got to conquer cancer and heart disease and diabetes. And they're all lifestyle related. It hasn't changed. The same reality of how we take care of ourselves. Anybody see the movie Super Size Me? The movie about what happens when you eat McDonald's for a month straight. I'm not anti-McDonald's. Enjoy. It's just not something that you want to eat every day, 3 times a day. And they show what happened to him as a result of that. And Califano said something quite profound. You, the individual, can do more for your own health than any doctor, any drug, any exotic medical device. That was in 1979. We had better drugs, better doctors, better medical devices, but that one ingredient, which is you, the individual, has to be put in for healing. And how I'll share that was mentioned Alzheimer's. I just had a personal experience with that. Thankfully not myself quite yet, but my mom had Alzheimer's, and she recently passed away at 90. We had a 7-8 year bout of going through that disease process with her, and it was quite challenging. And one of the things that we did, you know, when someone passes away, you have to go to their home and clean it out, and my sister and I went, and we decided, my mother left us one of her prized possessions, which was her recipe for chicken soup. That was the legacy, okay? And we got it out of her when she could remember, you know, where the stove was, as it were. And so we were in her house, and we said, let's cook Mom's chicken soup. We had the pots, we had the pans, we had the same butcher, the same stove, we had the recipe, we got all fresh ingredients, and because we had to do a lot of work for the whole weekend, we said, let's spend the weekend eating Mom's chicken soup. There was one problem. Even with all of that, it wasn't Mom's chicken soup. It's like there was something missing. Okay? There's like a missing ingredient that only she could put in. As a doctor, I want everybody to have the best chicken in their soup, the best doctor, the best cardiologist, the best dermatologist, the best rheumatologist, whatever they need in their soup. But sometimes, again, my experience has been, if they're in my office, there's an ingredient that they haven't put in that they still need. And it's the right touch of salt. You don't throw out the whole soup, but you have to look for the right touch of salt. And that right touch of salt is a person's consciousness, is their own involvement. We have stories, Tuesdays with Maury, right? The guy had amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, but we can smile and feel good because of how he chose to deal with it. If he just decided to mope and be miserable and feel like a victim and be angry at God, nobody would think of it. But we don't even think of the disease, we just think of his spirit. Or Christopher Reeves, you know, fighting, having a spinal cord injury. So that's something that I'm aware that people have to put in their soup, which is their consciousness, their choice how to do it. Their choice to go to the wise men. In the mind-body field, we can measure stress. The number one stress, and I'm probably certain many of you or some of you have already experienced this, is the death of a spouse or divorce. You're living with someone 50 years and they're gone. Who prepares you for that? And there's a lot of pain and a lot of grief and a lot of sadness, learning how to live with the pain of that. And people need help. Learn how to live with it. Well, how do you do that? It's not so easy. But it's part of medicine, because what happens in people's lives the year after the death of a spouse, if they don't get help facing the pain and dealing with it, their bodies break down, or the predispositions that they already have get worse. And it isn't that the treatments that we're putting in the soup are not the right ones. It's that the salt is needed, which is their engagement and their participation. So I had a patient who came in, and I helped him early on. He had high blood pressure, and he had weight issues, and he had digestive problems. And from a naturopathic doctor standpoint, he was like a perfect candidate to help, because we could change his diet and help him with that, and do it individually, and we could help him deal with stress. And I was mentioning I'm a meditation teacher, so I could teach him how to relax and kind of calm down and get him involved in changing his life and healing himself, getting involved in his lifestyle. And it all worked. His diabetes got better, he went to his conventional doctor, working together. Blood sugar is normal, doesn't need his medication anymore, so he could wean himself off that. Relaxed, lost weight, blood pressure is normalized, doesn't need to be on medication, in the sense of his body able to heal himself, right? Except 9 months later, he came back in the exact same condition that he did the year before. And I said, like, well, what did I miss? What didn't I look at in him? Even though I was holistic, helped him change, I didn't engage him. I didn't get him to put his salt in the soup. And I didn't get him to look at the message that his illness might have. When children the next day have a test and they have a stomach ache the night before, the stomach ache is real. It's not, they're not making it up, it's real. But what's causing it is their fear of the next day. Our bodies carry the messages of what's going on in our life. I mentioned my mom, I mentioned my dad because he was very instrumental in how come I'm standing here, not just because he bore me, but because of what happened to him. He was a soldier in World War II. And remember the movie Saving Private Ryan? Some of you may have been soldiers in World War II. And he was in Normandy. And we know war is hell. When he came back, I wasn't born yet, this is 1945, he's in Europe for 4 years. He came back a hero. We won the war. What I would later learn, looking back, I didn't know this until he died, that he suffered from post-traumatic stress of World War II. And I'm his son. He died, I was 24 years old. I never asked him, tell me about the war, Dad. Tell me what happened. And he never volunteered to talk about it because it was a horror. It was terrible. We had, the Pope was here last year, right? People came forward who had been traumatized and abused, unfortunately, by their priests. And they held on to it for 30 years. It was still affecting them. Until you clean it out of your system. It's like a splinter that festers, that doesn't go anywhere. As a result of my father's post-traumatic stress, and we're each suffering from some form of post-traumatic stress. It doesn't have to be as traumatic as being abused or being in a war, but each of us have our own hurts and our own wounds and our own stresses that over time we bear the burden of them and we carry them. And for my dad, what it was heart disease, and he smoked and he ate, and he was a wonderful guy, but he was a rageaholic. Like all of a sudden he'd start screaming out of the blue. You know, that was my dad. What is that? Where does that come from? Right? I never even thought to ask growing up just what it is. I made a connection again when McCain was running for president, and we know that he was a prisoner of war for 6 years. That's horrible trauma. And we also know when they talk psychologically about him, not politically or politics at all, that they talked, he had an anger, he had a temper. Yeah. You know? That's probably where some of that still was, you know, hiding in him, okay? In that sense. We had Bill Clinton, President of the United States. We know he liked to eat at McDonald's, right? And as soon as he finished 8 years of the presidency and the stress, what do you have? He had bypass surgery. And he needed it. His arteries got clogged. But what causes arteries to get clogged besides needing to eat at McDonald's? Obviously, he had a sex addiction. Otherwise, how could he do what he did? We knew that. And the stress of that, and the trauma of that, and we know what his childhood was. Not blaming anybody or be a victim. His father was, his stepfather, an alcoholic, used to beat his mom, and he had to protect her and stuff. That was what he grew up with in terms of his life. And because of that, he ended up getting bypass. But what did the bypass do? It let him live, for sure. He needed bypass, no question. But if he didn't change, and so that's what I'm sharing with you, integrating that component of change into the healing. The story about my dad that motivated me was, he ended up dying on the operating table at the age of 55, having bypass surgery. And then I started to ask the question, who was my father? I didn't, he died before I had a chance to find out who he was. And not that his doctors weren't wonderful and didn't care and didn't do the best they could, but they didn't engage him in a way that I think could have helped him, in a sense, heal himself. Mary, could you put on one or two of the slides? I'll share with you which ones I want to do. We have till 11:30?
We have until 11, and then